a common pitfall for a lot of yeshiva guys, where they come and they take on a whole bunch of things all at once, and like all of a sudden, a guy comes to Israel, he's dressing different, he's talking different, he's acting different, and all in the name of now I'm much firmer than I used to be. And first of all, it's nobody's interest to lose your personality and lose your sense of self when you come to yeshiva. The opposite. We want to, get in touch with ourselves and bring out the development that to make me the best me that I can possibly be. That's what we do in yeshiva. So the people who jump into it all at once too quickly, a lot of times, look different, talk different, act different, and then you go back home afterwards, or sometimes it doesn't even take that long, and then you're right back to where you were in the beginning, and probably much worse off as a result of that negative experience that you had. So you have to do things with seichel. You do things, lot, slowly, small increments, and that way it'll have a real impact.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Be'in podcast. This week, I'm joined by a very special guest named Rabbi Aryeh Ifrah. Rabbi Ifrah is a Rebbe at Yeshivat Torat Shraga, where I went to yeshiva. He's a very close Rebbe of mine. And the focus that I want to talk about today is a little bit different than everything else that I've done up until now, and that is halachic questions that come up during your year in yeshiva and seminary. And happens to be a lot of the questions that we discussed in this video are applicable to those that are not in yeshiva and seminary, that live outside of Israel, but there just happens to be a lot of overlap. So regardless of what stage you are at in life, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And obviously, if you have any follow-up questions and you want to get in touch with Rabbi Ifra or myself, you could always check the description below. Without further ado, it's time to jump into this week's episode with Rabbi Aryeh Ifrah. We'll see you guys soon. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Israel Gap Year Be'in podcast. I'm your host, Avi Proctor, and in each episode, we get Be'in in depth into the remarkable lives of individuals in Israel who dedicate themselves to inspiring the next generation of Klal Yisrael. Welcome, Rabbi Ifrah, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is one I know we've been talking about for a while, so appreciate you making this happen. There's a lot I want to talk about with you, obviously, today on the topic of halachic shilos that happen with students in Israel. Before I get to that, could you give me a little bit of an understanding about who you are, how you became a Rebbe in Yeshivat Torat Shraga, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I am originally from Philadelphia. I went to Mivaseret for 2 years after high school. After 2 years in Mivaseret, I went to YU, got married at the end of college, and spent a little bit of time in the kollel in YU. And then afterwards, my wife and I came to the Grus kollel. And after 3 years in the Grus kollel, I kind of just transitioned to the other side of the base medrash, which is Torah Shraga, and that's where I've been ever since.
Okay, awesome. So thinking back to when you're at that pivotal stage in your life, when you're post yeshiva and you're figuring out exactly what you want to do with your life, did you always envision yourself living in Israel, working in a yeshiva? Like, what would you have said to me back then if I would have showed you what you're doing today?
That's a really good question. I knew that there was one thing in life that I never wanted to do, and that was to go into chinuch. I never wanted to go into chinuch. Before I went to Israel, I was supposed to go to Johns Hopkins. I was very interested in diplomacy. So I went to go to Johns Hopkins, and they have programs in Washington, D.C., and get involved in international relations. That changed when I was in yeshiva. I decided that I wanted to continue learning, so I went to YU. And then even in YU, I didn't decide to pursue smicha until closer to the end of my college career. And even then, when I was in smicha, I knew I did not want to go into chinuch. I thought maybe Rabbanos or maybe, something else, but not chinuch. And then I came to the Grus kollel, share base measure Torah Shraga, and things just kind of happened from there. I started giving a chabura here and a chabura there, and next thing I know, here I am.
I feel like a lot of people when they take the the steps in life, to kind of get into chinuch, they have different role models that kind of inspire them to do it. Did you have anybody that you looked up to that you said, I kind of want to be like that person?
So I did have the Rav of my shul growing up. His name was Rabbi Brisman, Zichrono Livracha. He was an outstanding Talmud Chacham. Learned way back when from all the Gedolim of the previous generation. He learned in the Mir Yeshiva by Reb Chaim Shmulevitz and by Reb Nachum Persovitz, and then he learned in Lakewood. He was very close with V'ner Cutler and Moshe Feinstein. And I grew up hearing all these names. Rav Pam, he was related to Rav Pam. I grew up as a kid hearing all these names, throughout my childhood. It meant nothing to me at the time. I had never heard of any of these people. And then when I went to yeshiva and started to have exposure to what learning Torah is really all about, I had an epiphany, like, wow, this person that, we were very close to him, my whole family's very close to him, gave me a whole new level of appreciation for who he was. And he was always a role model for me. That's probably why I had an netiya that I wanted to go into Rabbanus. But it's not how it worked out.
There you go. It's funny because I feel like, we've known each other, Baruch Hashem, for a while, and I actually never knew that he was one of your role models. So always good to learn new things. Obviously, we could sit here for the next hour and talk about your life story, which obviously I would love to do, but there's a lot of other important things we have to talk about today. So the first topic of the halachic questions I kind of want to get into today is Hilchot Shabbat. So the first question that I'll kind of pose to you is for a student that's in Israel that doesn't have their mother lighting candles for them for Shabbos, and let's say they go away with their friends to an Airbnb or they're going away for Shabbos just what do they do about lighting Shabbos candles?
Yes, that's an important question. So when you're in yeshiva or seminary, so I imagine that there's an Av Bayit or an Aim Bayit who lives on campus or is spending Shabbos together with you, and they'll light candles usually in the dining room, and that covers basically the whole yeshiva. If you want to, in addition, you can't light candles in most dormitories, very dangerous, fire hazard. But if you want to get a little nightlight or something like that and turn it on in the hallway, that would be a good thing to do. But you're really yotze with the lighting in the dining room. When you go away for an Airbnb, so then you have a chiyuv of halakas neros. Halakas neros is not a mitzvah just for women; it's a mitzvah for everybody. So when you're married or you're in a place where there's a woman who's lighting, you can be yotze with her. But if there's no women around, so then the man is obligated to light candles. So you go to an Airbnb, you should light candles.
Is that, let's say if you have a group of 5 friends together that are going away for Shabbos, does that mean all 5 of them have to light candles, or one can light for everybody?
One can light for everybody.
Got you. Are there other Hilchos Shabbos related questions that you've seen from Talmidim asking you over the past, years of working in yeshiva that you think are nice to share?
There's tons of them. I don't know.
Give me a few. Before I ask other
Hilchot Shabbos is so vast. The Mishnah Berurah says in the Hakdama to Chelik Gimel that a person who doesn't learn Hilchot Shabbos, it's impossible to keep Shabbos. We always have to be learning Hilchot Shabbos and always chazering Hilchot Shabbos. So everything is a shiloh on Shabbos. I don't know where to start even. All the shilohs of Shia and Chazara about keeping the food warm before Shabbos and heating up food on Shabbos. And I don't know, it's just like endless. Borer, every little movement of anything that's mixed together, or you might not even realize what's considered a mixture, what's not considered a mixture. I don't know, and it's endless. I don't even know where to start.
I got you. I'll throw another one out there. I feel like this is a common one that a lot of people face, is that probably the most common way to heat up food for Shabbos by most people is a plata. When you have a plata in your house, or a student has in their dorm room, do you have to put an additional covering on the plata when you're heating up food for Shabbos? What's the process of going about that?
So it's a machlokas haposkim. There are poskim who say that you can just put the food directly on the plata when you're heating it up. We're talking about dry food, not liquid food. Liquid food you can't heat up on Shabbos, but food that's fully cooked and it's a solid food. So if you take it out of the refrigerator, there are poskim who say you can put it directly onto the plata on Shabbos, as long as the plata should be unadjustable, that you can't adjust the temperature. There are other poskim who say that that's not sufficient, that you should put the food on top of a kedera malaya, on top of, let's say, a crock pot that has a cooking in it, so you can heat up food on top of the crock pot, because the crock pot has a pot of food underneath, and then on top of that you can put the food that you want to heat up. Other poskim say something a little bit more in the middle, where you can put on the hot plate, but you should put a kedera rekanis. It would be enough to put an empty inverted pan or something like that on the hot plate, and then you can put your food on top of the inverted pan to heat up.
Does that same rule apply to also a crock pot as well? Do you have to insulate the entire crock pot with something also?
What do you mean?
Meaning, I've seen this before where you have a crock pot and you could obviously put the cholent or whatever you're cooking right in it, but I've also seen when I go to certain people's houses that the entire inside of a crock pot is lined by tinfoil. Have you ever seen that before?
Yeah.
Does that have to be done? Guess not. Okay, all good.
You could tape the. It's nice to tape the switch of the crock pot, and to make it unadjustable. And the Chumer of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach to put foil balls in the bottom of the crock pot to separate the pot from the heating element. I think that's enough.
Got you. Okay, the next one is a lot of people. I feel like big time of the winter, Friday night cholent. It's a great addition to Shabbos, and you want to take the cholent off the crock pot, but then you also want to put it back on. But there's a lot of aspects going on with that. So is there a way that you could properly take off tefillin, take for what you want, and all is good?
It's also machlokas poskim. If you take out the crack pot, you take out the pot from the heating thing, it's odo b'yado, you keep it in your hand, you have in mind that you're going to put it back. You're obviously not putting it on the floor, you're putting it on the countertop. So then you can scoop out some cholent, put it back in, and there are poskim who say that you can then put it back into the crack pot to continue staying warm. This is also assuming that it's totally cooked and no additional cooking would be taking place. But there are poskim who say that it's not okay, that putting it into the heating thing with a crack pot, you're actually putting it into something. The heter of heating food on Shabbos, or even returning something onto a heating source, is only when you're putting al gabav, when you're putting it on top. Like, let's say the hot plate, you put on top of a hot plate. But to put something into an oven, let's say, so that's aser. So this might be like putting into something. So to put it into the heating thing, put it back on. So there are poskim who say that it's aser.
Got you. Okay. Another aspect of Hilchot Shabbos is Erev. Obviously, we don't need to get so deep into it, but just on a surface level, could you assume that every place in Israel, there is a valid Erev to hold by?
I don't think you should ever assume anything about every place anywhere. But if you go to a place, there's a firm community, so you can always ask, one of the locals, is there an Erev here? Ask the Rav, is there an Erev here? And then if you use Erevs in general and there's an Erev here, then you can use it.
Got you. Okay, so adding on to Shabbos, obviously within the same conversation is Yom Tov, but in a different aspect, especially what a lot of students, deal with when it comes to, Yom Tov Sheni, 1 or 2 days. What would you say about that? Should students be keeping 1 or 2 days when it comes to Chag when they get to Israel?
That's also a very good question. So the classic Ashkenazi Psak, Moshe Feinstein and others is that, and this is what it sounds like in Shulchan Aruch, a person who's a ben Chutz La'aretz in Eretz Yisrael, Daito Lachzer, you intend on returning to Chutz La'aretz afterwards, so you have to keep Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galios even in Eretz Yisrael. And that's the classic psak, and I think that's the correct thing for most people. Sfardim have a different psak. Rav Ovadia held that a person who's here for the year, if he meets the following conditions, then he can keep 1 day. Would he stay in Eretz Yisrael on a permanent basis if he found a wife to marry her, was given an apartment, and was offered a job? Meaning, if you had an ideal scenario to stay in Eretz Yisrael, would you stay? If the answer is yes, you would stay, then you could keep 1 day. If the answer is no, so then you still have to keep 2 days. That's the classic 2 day, the classic 1 day. There is also the famous opinion of the Chacham Tzvi, that the Chacham Tzvi says that you can keep 1 day in Eretz Yisrael. And there are poskim who held like that. Shulchan Aruch Harav held like that. The Rav Kook held like that. So there are poskim who say that. There are poskim who could say you could keep 1 day, also Ashkenazim. Then there's the middle shita, Rav Soloveitchik, famously known as what they call a day and a half, which basically means that you keep an Isser Malacha for Yom Tov Sheni, but you still continue with Tefillah as if it were not Yom Tov. So what should you do? Ask your Rav, and he'll tell you what to do.
When it comes to asking questions, especially in yeshiva and seminary, a lot of students, they come to Israel and they're like learning about halacha, they're learning about the rules for the first time, call it like that. Where's good places to look to for like basic answers to halacha shaylas? When it comes to if a student has an extra 20 minutes a day to maybe learn halacha on their own, where would you recommend people to check out?
So I think that it's there's, first of all, today there's so many svarim, so many wonderful svarim in halacha, in Hebrew and in English. And, there's things that are in particular topics. There's Svarim in Hilchot Shabbos, and there's Svarim in Hilchot Brachos, and there's Svarim in Hilchot Kashrut, and there's Svarim in every area of halacha pretty much, in Hebrew and in English. And then there are Svarim that are more comprehensive. It's not on a particular topic, but let's say something like Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which they have also in Hebrew and in English. This is what Rav Shechter recommends to people when they're first learning halacha for the first time. You want to get a broad sense of all the basic issues. So learn through the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and that'll give you all the basic ideas. And then, after that, you can proceed to more advanced things. But that's a good place to start, I think, for the basics.
That's actually great. And I think, first of all, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is a very practical one. So shout out anybody who wants to learn that one, especially Alicia Cohn, who's sitting here listening to this one. I kind of want to channel into the next, aspect, which obviously all these questions that we're talking about today, we could spend an entire episode talking about each thing being, specifically when it comes to Shabbos and Yom Tov. But the next thing is Kashrut. It's something that for a lot of people that live abroad, that come to Israel, it's the most confusing thing. So just on a surface level, when a student comes to Israel, they go out and they're like, I don't know if this is okay, if that's okay. Are there any helpful resources or places online that you recommend people to check out to know, okay, this is good, this is not good, avoid this, avoid that?
Yeah, Kashrut in Israel is very confusing. There's so many different hashgachas, and some people eat this and they don't eat that, and what's okay and what isn't okay. It's also hard to give like very general rules. What I tell people as a broad guiding principle is that when you come to Israel, your kashrut standards shouldn't be less than whatever they are when you're in America. So, people think they come here, oh, it's got Hebrew writing on it. Obviously, it must be kosher. Definitely not. There are plenty of things here with Hebrew writing on it that are not kosher. So you have to make sure that you're maintaining the same standards they have in Chutz La'aretz, also when you come to Eretz Yisrael. So each person has different standards, maybe also in Chutz La'aretz. So that'll translate however it translates over here. And I think, again, the best thing to do is to ask your LOR and get guidance, because it's going to be different for different people.
Got you. I'm actually getting a shout out to a website that I heard about from Rav Miller in Gross when he gave a share earlier this year. It's called ZNT. I believe I'll put in the show notes for anybody that's listening to have a whole list of what's kosher and what's not. Another point, obviously you just said that you see something in Hebrew, you assume probably this is kosher, right? I've heard this from a lot of people before. Oh, I go to the shuk, like everything's got to be kosher, right? You're saying that's not the case, right?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Okay, so on the topic of not everything being kosher, I kind of want to get into, you go away for Shabbos to somebody's house and somebody invites you, a family friend, and you don't know what they keep kashrus wise. Should you be doing research before, asking them, do you eat this? Where's the line to draw when you're guesting their house? You don't want to make it awkward. You don't want to make it weird. Like what would you advise students to do in those situations?
Also a very good question. In general, if it's somebody that you trust religiously, that these are from family, from people that you're comfortable with. I think the same way when you go to somebody's house in America, if it's people that you know and people that you're comfortable with, their level of observance. So you don't start checking their kitchen before you go into their homes when they invite you to a Shabbos meal. So I think the same thing can be over here. If they're people that you're comfortable with the level of observance, so then you don't have to start drisha v'chakira, investigating all their practices in the kitchen. But if you're going to somebody's house who's not from, some people want to go to somebody's house who's not from for Shabbos. I don't know. That's
great. I mean, I want to add part two of that question is like, okay, you go to somebody's house, you think you know where they're kind of holding out religiously, or you think you could trust them, and then you get there, and let's say you see a label of the chicken or something they're eating for Shabbos, and you're like, oh wait, that's actually not something I eat and I hold by. What do you do in those situations?
So you have to know, like, it might be that you're makpid on a particular hashgacha or a particular set of hashgachas that you consider to be top tier hashgachas, and this is not a top tier hashgacha. So if you're going out on your own, that's not something you would buy. That's not something you would eat. But it's not treif. You're not saying that's not kosher, and you're at somebody else's house. Again, depending on what it is, but presumably if it's a regular, reputable kashrus organization, so. Again, as a rule, you should probably ask for particular situations, but as a rule, it's probably fine.
Got you. And this next question I'm going to ask, I have a feeling what your answer is going to be, but I'm still going to ask it anyways, obviously, is that if you're traveling with your friends, you're somewhere in Israel, and you're really hungry, you need food, and you're in a place where they have a few restaurants, but they're not necessarily the kashrut standards that you're typically used to. Should you be like, okay, I can't eat, like what am I going to do? Or is there like, what to rely upon in those situations?
Depends how desperate you are. Shasat chak. There's always coolest in Shasat chak, but a lot of times we live in a very spoiled generation. We're so used to being pampered and having everything we want at our fingertips that like a person feels a little hungry. So this is not something I would ordinarily eat. So, but if I wait, I don't want to wait another hour till we get to the next place. It's probably better to wait an hour. It's not a big deal.
Got you. I want to touch on just something that's probably relevant from the time we put out this episode actually is hopefully this is coming out right around Pesach time, and there will definitely be students in Israel that are listening to this hopefully. Pesach in Israel, at least from what I saw when I first came for the first time, was like a shocker to me, because when you're in America, very few things have kitnios, right? So could you give people a little bit of like an insight of how things kind of roll here in Israel when it comes to Pesach?
Yeah, so in Israel there are a lot of Sfardim, and Sfardim eat kitnios on Pesach. Not all Sfardim, but many Sfardim, most certainly. And so a lot of the hashgachas, even hashgachas that are good hashgachas, on Pesach we'll say kasher lePesach le'ochei kitniot bilvad. It's only for people who eat kitnios. So if you're Sfardi and you eat kitnios, so wonderful. You have many more options here in Israel than you do when you're in America. But if you're Ashkenazi, it becomes very confusing because all of a sudden there's all these hashgachas that say kosher lePesach, and then you have to make sure that you check, is it only locally kitnios or not? Because Ashkenazim cannot eat kitnios. Ashkenazim, the minhag and the Ramah is that Ashkenazim don't eat kitnios on Pesach, and so you have to be careful. Keep your eyes open.
Part two of that question, I guess, as a follow-up, is that if somebody buys something on Pesach, thinks it's all good, they get home, they're about to eat it, and they're like, oh, this is kidneyot and I don't eat kidneyot. What do they do in those situations?
They should not eat it.
Well, I'm saying, do you just throw it out? Are you over any issue of having chametz on Pesach?
No. Kidnios is not chametz. Kidnios is not chametz. There's no isur bal yirah bal yimatzeh on kidnios. But you put it away somewhere that you make sure that you won't eat it by accident. And then you can eat it after Pesach.
Got you. Okay. Love
or
that
give
answer.
it to your local Sephardic neighbor.
I was going to say that right there. Okay, so I want to now expand into step 3 of what we're building on is being in Eretz Yisrael, obviously, for many students in yeshiva and seminary. This is like the first time they've come to Israel. Are there any differences of practical things that come up on whether it's a day-to-day basis or on Shabbos, for example, of living in a Jewish country that you wouldn't necessarily have anywhere else in the world?
I'm sure there are. Like what? I don't know.
I have one in I was thinking, somebody told me this, that when you're walking on the street on Shabbos, for example, a lot of the drivers could be secular Israelis, and you should try not to walk into a crosswalk, for example, because they might step on the brake. Is there anything about that? I've heard that faintly before.
Yeah. if a person's driving and they step on the brake and then he's going to cause his car lights to light up because he steps on the brake, so maybe that's an isser, and you don't want to be the cause of the isser, so you should wait and let him go by first. There's a million things, like you get on the bus. The bus driver might be Jewish. So maybe you have in mind that, when you pay the bus fare, so you're paying a worker on time, which is a mitzvah. Not that you're paying the bus driver directly, but I don't know. Living amongst Jews, I guess, is just different.
There's a whole episode we can make on that. But just the first question that comes to mind, right, is as soon as somebody gets off the plane, where's the first place they go? The kotel, right? Okay. What's b'shat? Do you have to tear kriya? Do you not? Yeah, you have to tear kriya. The kotel is zecher l'churban beis hamikdash, and so as a sign of avelus over the churban beis hamikdash, we tear kriya. Rav Miller always likes to quote Rav Shlomo Zalman that a person lives in Yerushalayim. So the general practice, let me take a step back. Generally, the din is that if you haven't been to the Kotel in 30 days, not only the first time you get to Israel and you go to the Kotel first time, you tear kriya, and then you go to outside Yerushalayim somewhere, you're staying in Beit Shemesh. You stay in Beit Shemesh, and it's been more than 30 days since you went to the Kotel. Now you're coming back 35 days later, so you have to tear kriya again. Every time you go, if it's been more than 30 days, you have to tear kriya again, unless you live in Yerushalayim. If you're in Yerushalayim, then Rav Shlomo Zalman says that you're covered and you don't have to tear kriya each time you go to the kotel. Just the first time. Gotcha. I'm definitely guilty as charged, living outside of Yerushalayim and that 30-day threshold. Let's just say I keep a t-shirt in my car for when I need, but all good. The next thing I'm thinking about right now is being in Israel and buying kalim. For example, how does a student know if they should be toveling a keli if they buy it in Eretz Yisrael? Like how do you figure that out? So I think in general, the kalim that are made by Jewish companies and don't require tefillah because they were owned by a Jew and made by a Jew, and now you're buying it from a Jew, so it doesn't need tefillah. So they're labeled that way. It'll say on it, this doesn't require tefillah because it was always owned by a Jew. But in general, again, I'm not familiar with all the industry, but tons of things are imported. So just because you buy a pot from a store in Israel from a Jewish guy, it was probably a pot that was made in China, so you have to tovel it. And most things are like that. There are things that it'll say, this doesn't need tefillah, but most things you have to tovel. Well, definitely good to know. I want to build step 4 now is kibud av and respect for your parents. So this is pivoting in obviously another direction, but something that I think everybody really needs to have on their mind is there's obviously a mitzvah of honoring your parents. And a lot of situations, people go for the year in Israel, they begin to make all these life shifts, and then they have conversations, they have arguments with their parents about whether it's, Jewish things or hashkafa things, whatever. If, let's say a student has a conversation with their parent and they know what the halachic correct answer is, but their parent obviously is arguing a different side, what do you do in those situations? Is it you say, okay, kibud av is kibud av, I don't need to tell my parent what they maybe should be doing or shouldn't be doing? Give a little bit of guidance on those types of conversations. Yeah, that's a pretty common question. A lot of times people, students come to Israel
They spend a year or two learning in yeshiva. And unfortunately, at the end of the year, sometimes they go back home with a little bit of an attitude of holier than thou. Now I know what to do in all situations, and I view it as my mission to, give everybody else the 2-year experience that I had in the first 2 minutes that I see them. Oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. Obviously, that's not a good thing to be doing. Terrible. First of all, it creates a chil Hashem, because then your parents see, like, I sent a very nice young man or young woman off to Israel to study Torah for a year or two, and then they come back and they have no derech eretz, they don't have respect for their parents anymore. What kind of thing is it? I think you have to use a lot of seichel. A person has to think, what do my parents want to hear from me? In general, when you tell somebody that they're not interested, when you say something to someone that they're not interested in hearing, so if they're not going to listen to you anyway, what have you gained? Well, you just made it worse. Now, a person didn't know that something was a problem, and now you've told them that it's a problem. They're not going to change what they're doing either way, and now they're doing it knowing that it's a problem, so you made it worse for them. It's just, it's not wise. So you have to be careful. There are, just put it out there, there are parents who do want to know. Sometimes a kid comes home like, oh, teach us, what did you learn? I want to hear some new things. And, son learned, oh, there's a way to heat up food on Shabbos. It's better to do it like this and not to do it like that. So some parents are very happy to hear that, and they're like, "Oh, okay, so let's do it that way now." But so you have to know, probably kids do know their parents, and you have to know and be wise about it.
We got you. On the topic of speaking to your parents, obviously that part of that conversation and that answer you just gave me is like when you go back to your parents after being in Israel. While you're in Israel, though, I've seen this with many people before. Their parents, let's say, are not Shomer Shabbos, so they finish Shabbos in Israel. Their parents don't in America, and they send them a WhatsApp. Are you allowed to respond to them while it's not Shabbos for you, but it's Shabbos for them? Like, how do students go about those situations?
Yeah, you're not allowed to respond. You shouldn't be having a conversation with somebody when it's not Shabbos for you, but it is Shabbos for them, and they happen not to be from. It's probably a lifnei iver problem and even if they're going to be doing malacha anyway, so it's not lifnei iver deraisa, but it's a derabanan of misayeh lidei over avera. So you shouldn't have a conversation with them. And I think most people understand if you are machmir in areas of respect to your parents and respect to people in general. So generally what happens is that other people are respectful of you also. So people understand that you're Shomer Shabbos and you're from, and you can't text with them when it's Shabbos for them. I think if you take that approach, usually it's a safe approach. Can't promise there won't be an exception to the rule, but that's generally the approach, and you shouldn't be texting with people when it's Shabbos for them.
Another branch kind of that question is, and I saw this a lot during the war, and obviously there's still war going on. This is a very specific question, obviously, but just curious to hear your answer, is that, let's say there's a terrorist attack, God forbid, that happens on Shabbos, and Shabbos is over now for you, you're on your phone, but in America, they get news of what's going on, and your parents just text you, are you okay? Are you allowed to respond in those situations? Like, what is there anything different about a halachic answer in that?
I don't think so. I don't think there's really anything different. Maybe you have to be more creative about somehow communicating that you're okay to them. Like, let's say you put on your WhatsApp status, I'm in Israel and there was just a missile, but, Baruch Hashem, I'm okay and everything around me okay. You put on your WhatsApp status and then everybody will see it.
Now, I actually want to pivot in a completely 180 to a more day-to-day practical halachic things that happen with guys in yeshiva, and that's first thing on my mind, showing up late to shachars. What do you do in those situations? Do you start from scratch on your own? Do you jump to wherever the minyan's at? What do guys do in those situations?
So it depends how late you get there. Basically, the guiding principle is that you want to daven tefillah b'tzibur, which really means to daven Shemona Esrei together with the minyan. So when the minyan starts davening Shemona Esrei, you want to try and be up to Shemona Esrei with them. So you get to shul. Let's say they're halfway through Psukei de Zimra, or towards closer to the end of Psukei de Zimra, and you have to get your tefillin on. So the first thing you should do, you should make sure that you say the brachas of Elokai Neshama and Birchas Torah before you start Psukei de Zimra. The reason for that is that Elokai Neshama, if you don't say it before, you might be Yotzei with the bracha of Mechayim Mesim in Shemona Esrei, and then it'll be a suffix if you could say Elokai Neshama afterwards or not. Birchas Torah also to say before. All the rest of the Birchas HaShachar you could say afterwards. And then put on your tefillin. And for Ashkenazim, minimally, you have to say Baruch Shamar Asher Yishtabach. And if you could say Baruch Shamar Asher Yishtabach and then continue with the Tzibur and Birchos Kriyash Ma and get up to Shemon Esrei, that would be ideal. For Sfardim can come even a little bit later, then they can even skip the entire Psukei de Zimra. And if your tefillin is on by the time the Tzibur is saying Baruch Hu, then you'll just pick up with Baruch Hu and continue with Birchos Kriyash Ma. Let's say you have a little extra time, you have a little more time than just Baruch Shamar Asher Yishtabach. So then you add in the third and fifth Hallelujah. And then maybe the first also. To look in the Mishnah Berurah, see exactly what, but I think Yehi Chvod has the rest of the Halalukas, Yehi Chvod, Vayivarech David, and then whatever else, you can finish, you can add in depending on how much time you have.
Got you. So let's say a guy's in the situation where, he wakes up in the morning, he's like, oh shoot, I just completely missed Shachars. Do you recommend, let's say he wakes up 2-3 hours after Shachars. Sorry, that was the more specific question I want to ask. Is that if you wake up a few hours after Shachars, does the guy have to put on tefillin now and daven Shachars on his own? Does he wait till Mincha? What do guys do in those situations?
Yeah, he should wake up. It depends what time he woke up. Assuming that he woke up early enough to daven Shachars, ideally before Sof Span Tefillah. So then even if he missed the minions, there's no minion around, he puts on his tefillin, he daven Shachars. And B'di Eved, even up until Chatzos, he can still daven Shachars. If you woke up after Chatzos, so that you missed it. And then you can still put on your tefillin and say Kriyash Ma, but you missed Shachars, and then you'll have to daven Mincha. Depending on why you missed Shachars, will determine on whether or not you can say Tashlumin for Shachars and daven 2 Minchas. 2 Minchas is only if you missed Be'ones, something that was beyond your control. If a person woke up and he's like, I don't feel like davening Shachars today, I'll go back to sleep. And then he goes back to sleep and he sleeps till Chatzos, and then he's like, I'll just daven 2 Minchas. And then he wakes up, you can't daven 2 Minchas. Then you're amazed, you missed on purpose. So there's no 2 Minchas. It's only if you missed something beyond your control. Let's say you were sleeping and you didn't hear your alarm, or you just totally overslept and you slept all the way till Chatzos. So you didn't intend to do that. It was totally a mistake. So then you can daven Tashlumin.
Related to that answer, and obviously every answer that you give me today, is halacha is something that is very vast, and there's so much to learn and so much to talk about. And for guys and girls that are in Israel that begin to learn about halacha for the first time, it could be very overwhelming, right? So do you have any advice of how to kind of go through the road of halacha without feeling like so overwhelmed and just not doing anything at all, kind of?
Yeah, so I think that in general, I like to tell people to do things a lot. You do things slowly. A person who is, new to the world of Frumkeit in general, and even a person who's not, a person who grew up Frum, but you're now new to the world of details in halacha. So if all of a sudden you start deciding I'm gonna every single thing like I'm there, which is ultimately where you want to be. So it becomes very overwhelming, and maybe it'll last for a day or two or a week, and eventually you'll probably collapse underneath the weight of all the new things that you decided to take upon yourself. So in order to make sure that whatever positive changes you're making are lasting positive changes, so it should be done slowly, one thing at a time, 2 things at a time, depending on what it is. I never heard of washing my hands in Netilas Yadayim in the morning when I wake up, Nagelwasser. So now I'm washing Nagelwasser. Okay, washing Nagelwasser. A person, the whole area of Hilchos Brachos is such an overwhelming thing. I have to make a bracha before I eat, every time before I eat. I have to make a bracha achrona after everything I eat. I have to make a bracha after I go to the bathroom, every time I go to the bathroom. There are so many brachas, so it's overwhelming. A person who never said brachos before, now it's hard to say when I say, so don't make brachos. No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying focus on one thing. I'm working right now on Asher Yatzar. That's what I'm working on. So every time I go to the bathroom, I'm making sure to say Asher Yatzar. Does that mean I'm saying a person shouldn't make a bracha before and after he eats? No, chas v'shalom, I'm not saying that. But that's not what I'm worried about right now. I'm not gonna eat myself up. I'm not gonna beat myself up over forgetting to make my bracha rishona achron on food, because right now I'm working on Asher Yatzar, or the opposite, whatever particular order it is, because that's the way to make sure that it's lasting. Which is I think a common pitfall for a lot of yeshiva guys, where they come and they take on a whole bunch of things all at once, and all of a sudden, guy comes to Israel, he's dressing different, he's talking different, he's acting different, and all in the name of now I'm much firmer than I used to be. But first of all, it's nobody's interest to lose your personality and lose your sense of self when you come to yeshiva. The opposite, we want to get in touch with ourselves and bring out the development that to make me the best me that I can possibly be. That's what we do in yeshiva. So the people who jump into it all at once too quickly, a lot of times look different, talk different, act different, and then you go back home afterwards, or sometimes it doesn't even take that long, and then you're right back to where you were in the beginning, and probably much worse off as a result of that negative experience that you had. So you have to do things with seichel. You do things, lot, slowly, small increments, and that way it'll have a real impact.
Happens to be, by the way, that answer right there could be an entire episode in and of itself of just pacing yourself, burnout. So we'll do a part 2. In terms of actually learning halacha and getting a greater understanding and knowledge, obviously there are so many svarim you can learn from. So if you're in a situation where you're looking up a source and you see 2 different opinions or even more, what do you do in those situations? How, for somebody that has a lack of halachic understanding and knowledge, because we're in like the beginning stages of learning, how do you decipher what you should be doing?
Yeah. I think that you have to have a Rebbe, asay l'charav. You have a Rebbe, and there's many areas of machlokas and halacha, and that's inevitably going to be happening for people who are learning halacha. You'll find different people saying different things. So you should have a Rebbe. You ask, like, what should I do? You want to try and maintain a certain sense of consistency. You don't want to be a kula shopper that, let me just find all the opinions that are lenient in every situation, and this book is lenient here, and that book is lenient there, and this person is lenient about this, and that person is lenient about that. First of all, a lot of times that could lead to inconsistencies, because a leniency in one area of halacha oftentimes creates a stringency in another area of halacha. You might not realize that there's a connection between those 2 places, but by being lenient in both, so you're being inconsistent. That's a very bad thing, the Gemara says. So you should find a Rebbe who you can ask your shilas to. There's not always a Rebbe available. So in general, if you have a question, you look up in the Mishnah Brura, you can look up in a standard sefer. When you have a question, usually you can follow it. But sometimes there's machlokas, and if there's machlokas, you ask.
1,000%. I actually want to go back to one of your answers you said 2 questions ago, was that you have students that come to Israel, they learn, and they jump in the water and they drink the Kool-Aid, that's the expression, I guess, and they get through a stage where they're very, very religious, they're very intense, then they kind of burn out a little bit. Do you have any advice for, let's say, someone that might be listening to this that goes through that kind of, where they like burn out a little bit from trying too hard to kind of get back on their feet?
Well, first of all, we should realize that is an age-old problem, right? Rav Wolbe has the famous piece in the Alei Shor, Yemei Ha'ava and Yemei Ha'sina, days of love and days of hate. And he quotes there from Rabbeinu Tam that Rabbeinu Tam also experienced this. Every person experiences this in their lives in yeshiva and in our lives in general. We all have good times, ups and downs, highs and lows. And it's important to realize that, when we are living a frum, committed lifestyle as people who are dedicated to Avodas Hashem, so it can't be only an emotional commitment, which means that when I'm feeling it, so then I'm there. When I'm not feeling it, so then I'm not. So you have a guy who'll come every day to Shachris. He'll come early for 3 weeks in a row because he's feeling it, and then he hits a rut, and he sleeps till, like we were talking about before, he sleeps till after Chatzos for the next 3 weeks in a row. That's a recipe for disaster in terms of his overall growth in life. We have to come to it from a commitment, an intellectual commitment that we know that this is the right way to live. This is good for us, it's good for the world, it's correct. And so I come to the question with like a baseline commitment. It's almost like Nasa v'nishma. I don't even know what I'm committing to yet, but this is right, so that's what we're going to do. Then I recognize that there are ups and downs, there's challenges along the way. So when I'm feeling inspired and things are going well for me, so great, ride the wave and maximize that time. But inevitably for everybody, you hit the Yemei Ha'sina, where it's tough. And I think there, it's important just to maintain the basic commitments. There's certain things that as Jewish people we're obligated to do. We daven every day 3 times. Like we said before, we say brachos. There are things that are chiyuvim, and we have to continue to maintain those chiyuvim. Now, a lot of times there are things that we do that are extra. A guy is in yeshiva, He's very inspired. He has chavrusas during lunch. He has chavrusas during dinner. He has chavrusas after night seder. So when you're in a little bit of a tough time, you need to like clear out your head. So those are the times to like take a step back, to relax a little bit. Don't overwhelm yourself. Again, for each person, it's going to be a little bit different. You know, it's a little bit of a personalized question, but to realize that you have to give yourself the break in those times. But even with that break, it's not a break from the basic. There has to be a basic line that these are things that I'm committed to. I'm doing no matter what.
First of all, I think that's a fantastic point, and just I love hearing advice sometimes. Even when I do these episodes, I think that I'm doing it for the listeners, but obviously I get to benefit from them as well. And I think that's a great point of just stick to the basics, you know, and sometimes when it gets too crazy in your head, it's just be simple. On the topic of taking things kind of upon yourself and learning things, is burnout could happen, obviously, but a way to prevent burnout, there could be many different answers to that question. But more specifically is, have you seen success in, or I'll phrase it a little bit differently, is that what are tips, I guess you could say, to know if what someone's taking on, which a lot of these things are new, is too much? And will these things that I'm taking on last? Meaning, are there ways to kind of gauge it as you're doing that process?
That's a good question. I think that if a person finds himself becoming unhappy, stressed, anxious because he's taking on all these things, so as soon as those feelings start to creep in, that's like a red flag. Like, hey, we're probably moving a little bit too fast over here. Scale it back a little bit and take it a little bit more slowly. A lot of times, unfortunately, also, I think some of the growth, quote unquote, that people experience is a little bit superficial. And instead of having like real growth, so we jump to things that are external, and a person starts dressing differently than he did before, talking differently than he did before. So those kind of things, I think the guiding light over there is, I don't need to stick out. I don't need to be different than all the other people around me. So if I'm in a place where everybody dresses a particular way, and in yeshiva, and all of a sudden I'm going to start dressing differently, so that's like a little strange. Like, why do you have to be different than everybody else? Now, there are times, that being said, there are times where I do want to be different. Like if I'm in a totally secular environment, and I want to maintain certain standards of behavior because I'm a firm Jew. So then sometimes it is helpful to actually dress differently, because then you show that, like, no, I'm different. People will treat you different. They'll respect you for the differences. But I'm not talking about that. More in a yeshiva context. So everybody dresses a certain way. Why do I have to be different than everybody else? So I think that also is something that's a little bit of a red flag. Like, why do you feel the need to do this? And it could be a person has a reason that does make sense, but it's just something that needs to be, considered.
Absolutely. I want to ask kind of one more question on just this overall topic of learning halacha. You begin to learn yourself. There's hundreds sometimes of other students in your school that are also in the same boat as you, and everybody grows at their own pace. If you're learning something, let's say I learn a halacha about making a bracha in this type of situation, and you are with a friend in that situation, and you know what's right to do, and let's say you know that they do not. Is it your place to say anything to them? How do you kind of navigate those friendships within, like, those contexts?
So I think on the one hand, like we said, when it comes to your parents, if your parents don't want to hear it from you, so you shouldn't be telling it to them, because it's not going to help. So a lot of times when friends start to come to their other friends, give them musar and tell them, oh, you have to do like this, you're not allowed to do like that. So a lot of times friends also don't really appreciate it. However, oftentimes there's also more of an openness amongst friends, because you're all in the boat together. You're all in yeshiva together. You're all experiencing the same type of growth during the course of the year. So guys a lot of times are more open to hearing new things from peers. But that being said, there's a very nice vort that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky has in Emes Yaakov, when Yaakov Avinu comes to the well and he sees all the shepherds gathered around the well, and he rebukes them. He's like, it's the middle of the day. It's not time to gather in all the flocks. What are you guys doing here at this early hour? So they tell him, no, there's this big heavy rock, and we have to wait till everybody gets here, and then we can all take the rock off the well together and give the sheep something to drink. So the pasuk says, when he first addresses them, he says to them, achai. my brothers. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says that this is really the key to being able to positively influence other people in your life. That if you relate to other people as achai, as people that I love and people that I care about. So it's a totally different experience. When you feel like somebody's telling you something that you're doing wrong and they're being critical of you and they're disrespecting you and they're looking down at you. So we're people. We're the natural feeling is that we get insulted and we become defensive and we don't want to hear it. But when a person comes to you and he says something to you and it's coming from a place of this person really cares about me, this person loves me, we have a good relationship, so you take it in a totally different way, right? Like you're walking down in the crowded marketplace and in the shuk, and all of a sudden somebody comes and smacks you on the back, and you're like, there's like smoke coming out of your ears, you're fuming, like who did that to me? What is that? You turn around, you're ready to start yelling at the guy, punch a guy in the face. You turn around, it's like your best friend. You're like, oh, yo, how you doing? You give him a big hug, like I haven't seen him in such a long time. It's a totally different, the patch is a different kind of patch. So I think that's also over here. When you're talking to your friends and when you guys are discussing halachic things or religious things or experience of growth, and you're telling somebody, oh, I learned this, oh, I learned that, oh, I think we should do it like this. So a lot of times it depends like how you give it over, and that will determine how it's received.
That was a fantastic story, by the way. And I never heard that one. And just coming from like a real place, I feel like when somebody knows that you care, it's always perceived differently. I'm going to throw out my last question to you as we end. For anybody that's listening to this, at whatever stage they are at in life, if you had one message in a bottle that was like, take this with you and keep this with you for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Oh boy.
Threw you on the spot right there.
Yeah. One message for life. It reminds me of a Gemara. The Gemara says that, the Gemara Shabbos says that the ger came to Shammai, and he said to Shammai, convert me while you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one leg. So Shammai dechafo ba'amas habinyan, he pushed him away with a measuring stick that they use for building. He said that's a ridiculous request. You can't teach somebody the entire Torah while he stands on one leg. He comes to Hillel, and Hillel converts him. And he says, Da'alach sani l'chavrich l'savid, whatever you don't want done to you, don't do to other people. Essentially, v'afterecha kamocha. And the rest is pirushim, so you should go study the rest. So some of the freshmen there ask, the Marsha asks, what's going on in this story that, on the one hand, this person is making what seems to be a ridiculous request. So we understand why Shammai was not very receptive to such a ridiculous request. But on the other hand, if the person is not a serious candidate for conversion, he's not a serious person. So what's Hillel doing converting him? Like what's the... So the Marsha says that what the request was give me one principle upon which the entire Torah stands. He wasn't telling him, teach me the entire Torah, stand on one leg. He's telling him, give me one fundamental principle that everything stands on. And Shammai said it's impossible. There is no one principle that the entire Torah stands on. And I was to say, a Chassidish word. It's not any Chassidish sefer. I saw in the Amudei Eish on something, forgot where. But the language of the Gemara is dechafo ba'amas habinyan, that Shammai pushed him away with amas habinyan. It's like a measuring stick for building. So if you divide up the letters a little bit differently, so you could read it as dechafo be'emes, he pushed away with the fundamental truth. Habinyan can be divided into two words, have nin. Give me a nin. A nin in modern Hebrew is a great-grandson. In the Chumash, it sounds like it means a child. But we'll go with the Hebrew now because it just brings out the point a little bit better. Dechafo be'emes habinyan, he says, I'm pushing away with the fundamental truth. Have nin. What you're asking me for now to teach you the entire Torah while you stand on one leg is like asking for a great-grandchild. You can't just get a great-grandchild. First, you have to get married. You have to have children. You have to raise them. They have to get married. They have to have children. They have to raise them. They have to get married. And then you'll have a great... It's a lifetime work to have a great-grandson. So the whole Torah is also... It's a lifetime pursuit. It can't be... There's no one... catch-all that I can tell you. So he says, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So Hillel says to him, no, there's one thing. He says, the alach sani l'chavrich l'savid, that v'aftarecha kamocha really is the key. There's a lot to talk about that, how that's the case also. But I think that's what, especially in our generation, I think that speaks to a lot of people. The question that has to be asked in the Gemara is, well, that is very nice representative of all the mitzvahs bin adam l'chaveiro, but what about the mitzvahs bin adam l'makom? And we're not going to explore that now. We're not going to go through that. But I think that those are the, v'aftarecha kamocha, that's the takeaway. And that's good. And I think it's easy for us to connect to that. But I think sometimes because it's so easy for us to connect to bin adam l'chaveiro, oftentimes we don't give the proper attention to bin adam l'makom. So we have to bear those two things in mind, to be cognizant of both. And the Mitzvah Hashem, continue to grow.
That was a very unique answer, by the way, that I never heard from anybody that came on here. So, Yashar Koach, and thank you. Also, love the shout out about the Amudei Eish. If anybody wants to buy that sefer, I don't know where they could buy it now, but reach out to us for inquiries. But that kind of wraps up all the things I want to talk about with you today. So I just want to thank you again, as I said in the beginning. I've been wanting to do this for you for a while, and this was an awesome conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time. And
thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate it.
That is a wrap right there. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Rabbi Ifrah. And obviously, there are so many other things that I could have talked about with Rabbi Ifrah, but with the limited amount of time that we have, I tried to touch on all different areas of halacha with him. And if you guys want to hear part 2, or if you want to get in touch with myself or Rabbi Ifrah, check the description below. We'll see you guys soon in 2 weeks for the next episode. All the best.